Let's try to SSH in. Great, so now let's install Anka. Pull up the Anka documentation, and we could use the pkg installer if we had GUI access, but let's instead use the terminal installer commands. Copy those, paste them in, and voila, we now have Anka. Great, so on this host, I've actually got a firmware restore file that I'm going to use to create a VM. So I specify Anka create, the name of the VM, and the firmware restore file. After a while, I will now have a created VM that I could do Anka list to see. I can then get information about the VM by running Anka show and double check the CPU, RAM, and disk size. Everything looks good, so this is ready to use. So now I'm going to create a second VM with a different Macintosh version. Pretty much the same process. And then with Anka list, I'm going to confirm that both are there. In order to be able to roll back the VM, we don't modify the original, so let's create a clone instead. And then we're going to start both VMs and make sure they're running. There we go, 2 running VMs, and the original's stopped. Now I'm going to VNC into this VM, so I need to get the IP address and the forwarded port. This is because I'm going to VNC into the host IP at the forwarded port. So I'll grab the IP from the AWS console and then the forwarded port. And then it'll ask me for the credentials. I'll put those in and I am inside of the VM. This is now a fully functional Macintosh VM. Once I've verified that the VM is ready to go, I will then VNC into the second VM and pull them up side by side so you can see that I have these 2 independent VMs ready for use. So in my Jenkins, I've connected both of the VMs as nodes, which I can now run my jobs inside of. So you can see they're both running, and then they're showing up in Jenkins under nodes. Here are both VMs, and I am logged in through VNC, so we can see the simulators run. So I'm going to pull up my iOS testing job. In the execute shell step here, we can see that I clone a project, I then start a simulator, and I install the app and then launch it. Now in the job log, you can see that it is working. It's doing a git clone, and then it's running the build. Perfect, so it looks like the simulators are starting within the VMs, and it's installed the app and then launched the app, and we can actually manipulate it with the mouse. You can see in the console log it launching the actual app inside of the simulator. Now if we try to start a second build, it will be pending. That's because the node that we have can only do 1 executor at a time. Let's go ahead and add a second executor. And great, now we have the second job running here. Now there are commands being executed inside of the VM at this point, just as if there would be for bare metal. And you got to be really careful because if you're using the same names for things, you're using the same build directories, you're almost guaranteed to have environment pollution and also collisions with the simulators and the build directories and everything. In this example, both jobs are actually targeting the same simulator name. The simulators are called test. So even though it's launched a second simulator, it's going to install the app inside of the first simulator while the previously started app is actually still started. There we go, and you can see that the app was restarted but in the wrong simulator. Needless to say, it's much better to run this in an ephemeral way where you start 1 job per VM, and then after the job is done, the VM is actually terminated. You'll need the Anka Build Cloud controller for that.